Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Hi, Bill. Thank you again for doing the New Economy Forum. We'll begin, I think, on greenery. And I've just read your new State of the Transition report. And in that, you start with a bold claim that basically the climate business in 2024 reminds you, or seems at the same inflection point that medicine was back in 2020 when you began the whole vaccines drive. And your argument is that we now have most of the technologies we need to fight climate change or to deal with climate. And I wondered, perhaps you can just give us a couple of examples. I know that you talk about a lot of technologies like clean hydrogen, aviation fuel, and so on, but just give us a couple of examples of why you think that, because it's a very big claim.
Well, my key theory of change on climate is that if the clean approach, the green approach, is more expensive, that we won't get global adoption. Perhaps rich countries will subsidize clean approaches, but as you get into the middle-income countries like Brazil, India, and others, they would say, hey, we're not responsible for the historic emissions, and so slowing down our providing basic capabilities to our population, that we shouldn't be impeded. And so the way to square this is to innovate in all the areas of emissions so that the new approach that's clean costs less. That's either a zero green premium or literally a negative green premium. And that's what Breakthrough Energy was founded to do. We have 130 companies. A good example is one that's working on the way that steel is made. They're called Boston Metals. They're actually working with partners in Brazil to build a plant there that looks like it'll be able to make very competitive steel, but in a very, very clean way. We have geothermal, company called Fervo. We have people who make windows called Luxwall. That means you don't have to heat or cool your building as much. So these 130 companies are driving forward this innovative approach, and we still have a lot of work to do to take things that some of which are just at the lab, some of which are still quite expensive, but volume is needed to bring the cost down, like we saw with solar panels and batteries. But we're on our way. We've got the IQ of the world, and in every one of the areas of emission, I see a path to zero, which means we can get adoption where we need it.
I'm quite interested. You've backed quite a lot of green startups. There are a lot of people in this audience who are involved in that industry. Some of them get to scale, some of them don't. Have you reached any conclusion about what is the factor for success?
Well, everything is very domain dependent. I had to learn a lot about the history of steel making or different approaches for making cement, to understand, okay, why has that stayed the same for so long? And now that we're getting lots of new people looking at that, what are these new techniques? Teaming up with large companies, working in multiple geographies. It's very science-based. It's, fun to meet those innovators. It's more capital intensive than, say, the digital revolution. And, we can't underestimate that means that the scale is tough. We can run into geopolitical barriers sometimes, but on the whole, even though we won't meet the highest goals, we will start to get emissions down, and we'll avoid this being the primary thing that's slowing down human development.
About nuclear, you've been a big backer of nuclear through things. I looked up kind of Google, Amazon, Microsoft, as you know. They're all beginning to invest money in nuclear things. Do you think the wind is changing? I suppose that's a bad metaphor, but do you think that there is a change in the way people are looking at this?
Well, there's certainly a number of countries, including the United States, where both the public attitudes and the level of investment in nuclear fission are quite positive. You know, at the COP28, a lot of countries came together and talked about tripling nuclear over the future. So that's very different than going into decline. There's a big challenge, though, which is those third-generation plants. They have a lot of pressure. They're very expensive. They're very complex. So there's a question: can we get to this fourth generation? And so you have a number of companies trying to usher in much simpler designs, including the one I'm involved in called TerraPower.
Yeah.
There's several other companies doing that. But yes, the fact that the tech companies want to be customers for green energy, and at least for a period of time, they're willing to pay a bit of a premium. And as the volume of reactors go up, then that premium goes away. That is extremely helpful to reboot the nuclear industry around these fourth-generation plants.
There is an issue, though, isn't there? That a lot of the attention has been on small modular reactors or kind of reviving old ones rather than building big new ones. Is that a problem? It looks at it from the outside, but I don't know.
Well, if you get small, you can do a lot of your labor off-site, which is advantageous, but it also means your efficiency is a lot less. And so the approach TerraPower is using is to have a medium-sized reactor, 345 megawatt electric. In our roadmap, if utilities do want big ones, those are somewhat more efficient. But first we want to build dozens of our medium-sized reactor, and we've been able to move some of the labor off-site, although we still have some on-site. But size, it's very tricky to get the efficiency as you get small, because it's the kind of the volume of the reactor is your value and the surface area is your cost. So different people are taking different approaches, and of course we have digital design and simulation that is letting us build far, far simpler plants than ever before.
What about fusion? I know it's a question I think I probably ask you once every 5 years. Do you think that is, it always seems to be 5 years away, or at least that, is it now getting closer at all? There have been one or two people recently suddenly saying there's possibilities.
Yeah, so Breakthrough Energy, where almost all my climate work is, and I'm the largest investor in, we funded 4 different fusion companies. The one that's furthest along is pretty fantastic, called Commonwealth Fusion Systems. That's a spin-off essentially from MIT, and they're hard at work building their prototype facility outside of Boston. And so it's, you could say it's about 6 to 10 years behind the fourth generation fission. But it has a lot of advantages, and over time it could be even less expensive. And so we're backing these companies, and they're even using very advanced software to simulate how they work. So in the long run, fission and fusion will be a substantial part of power generation, complementing the renewables that are being built at high speed.
Can I just contrast, because you've sort of alluded to it a couple of times, the kind of gap between all the kind of business optimism, the scientific possibilities that are now opening up, with the political realities which seem to be going in the opposite direction. Just to give you an example, you played quite a big role in getting the Inflation Reduction Act through in America. You personally went and persuaded Joe Manchin. It was a big deal. And there was kind of greenery within that, as we both know. A good portion of that could well get dumped if Trump comes in. What do you think is the most endangered technology out of the stuff that managed to get through under that bill?
It'll be interesting because, what the Congress will see is that bill is causing a lot of projects to be built in red states. And so ideally we'll get some bipartisan defense of what's being done there. I do think nuclear is particularly bipartisan because it has to do with energy security as well as climate. But you could have some things like the electric vehicle tax credit or the green electricity tax credits. You could have them come under attack. I think they're a good thing. I think they're ushering in new industries. The general idea that taxpayers are going to pay a lot of extra money for products because they want to reduce emissions, that has been pushed hard enough that there really is a backlash. We see that in Europe, we see that in the US, and that's why this theory of innovation is the only way you square the imperative to get rid of the emissions, but without having people say, hey, I'm not going to pay for it. And actually, that can even influence elections if you push too hard.
Do you think that thing, though, on the demand side, in a strange way, the demand kick has been given? Now these technologies are underway. It wouldn't be terrible if it wouldn't help if they went away, but it would if those kind of reliefs were taken away.
Well, you have different levels of maturity, and so I'd say that electric vehicles, even without the subsidies, over time they are going, even for the people who park on the street, the low end, they will get to a zero green premium. You have things, particularly industrial emissions like steel, cement, that we're just building the pilot plants now. And so without governmental policy and support, the transition of the industrial emissions would slow down a lot. And, that's very unfortunate if that takes place. Likewise, in transportation, airlines are, the toughest part of all of the emissions, and they're, without support, that'll get pushed back.
Can I ask you one kind of strangely capitalism-related question? I mean, you have arguably been one of the world's, well, you've definitely been one of the world's most successful capitalists of the past 25, 30, 40 years. Last week, I sat on a stage with Donald Trump, and he said that he wanted to introduce tariffs, 10, 20% on everywhere, and his argument was this was very good for American business. In your experience, does that make sense?
No, it's certainly not the case, and the difficulty of convincing voters that free trade is overwhelmingly to their benefit. It's unfortunate how difficult it is to make that case. And so, I understand a politician who chooses to take advantage of that, but, we will suffer overall. Welfare will improve less, as not only will, if the U.S. puts tariffs on, of course, other people will put tariffs on as well, and the economic dynamism and speed of innovation will be significantly slowed.
Just to push you on that dynamism point, it's very easy to make the argument that this means higher prices for consumers, but this issue of dynamism, you've been involved in entrepreneurship, these things, most of your life. If you have less foreign competition, less foreign goods, that must have an impact on it. I know it's back to a creed you've believed in, but in practice, is that argument possible to make to voters?
Well, we should find articulate politicians who can make the case. If you take most of the industries I think about, like, inventing a new drug or writing a new piece of software or birthing a new climate technology, you have these gigantic fixed costs. And the fact that you can do that work and then sell it on a global basis means that everybody's getting faster innovation and lower prices. And if you start to fragment markets because of either tariffs or regulatory barriers to that trade, it absolutely takes away the lower prices and high-speed innovation.
You mentioned health. It struck me, maybe this is unfair, but health is kind of the opposite to climate, is that at least there were incredible health gains in the early 2000s. It seems to have stalled a bit. What's needed to create another global health boom?
Well, I'm actually quite optimistic. Both the diseases in lower income countries and the diseases in rich countries, we are seeing incredible advances, whether it's obesity drugs, long-acting drugs. Gene editing is still super expensive, but the Gates Foundation is putting a lot of money into trying to get that from millions of dollars to hundreds of dollars so we can take a disease like sickle cell that's prominent in Africa. And as we do that, it'll benefit all the world's health systems. And then, of course, AI will be applied in health in the upstream discovery piece to speed up new drugs, but it'll also be applied in the downstream delivery, sitting in the sessions with doctors, helping with follow-up, helping with paperwork. And so I think the health sector will be an exemplar that AI can improve things quite dramatically.
There's one thing which is a little bit similar is that issue, and you did it in your Netflix series, this issue of trust, is that there are these things that appear very logical to do with health, and yet people don't seem to believe it, COVID being the obvious example. How do we deal with this sort of deficit of trust when it comes to health? Is it just to do with a deficit of trust in governments, or is it broader than that?
Well, certainly I never expected, as the pandemic came along, that many people had warned about, the idea that people would reach for oversimplistic explanations, like attacking either myself or Tony Fauci, or attacking the idea of vaccines. I wouldn't have expected that, and certainly a lot of people, particularly older people who should have been vaccinated, were not. So, those rumors, literally caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. I'm hopeful with that out of the way that we can go back to, a more scientific way of looking at health innovation. When people see the effects of things like these obesity drugs, it should remind them that, we can improve health pretty dramatically.
I agree. The obesity drugs are a very good example in one direction. On the other hand, you have stuff about, hurricanes and things like that. You still see that basic trust that people used to have in, quote unquote, scientists and governments. It's amazingly small compared with what it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, there's like these latest hurricanes, some people blame me for those too. I'm very busy. But hopefully, the basic decisions about what's safe and what's beneficial, we maintain that. And, I think positive progress will help get people back, looking at what experts are telling them the truth is.
One quick thing on health, the mosquito-borne diseases seem to be a little bit back on the rise, dengue and the West Nile stuff. People, are you worried about that? I mean, it just seems to be a slight blip in an otherwise very positive picture.
Yeah, of course, the biggest part of that, which is kind of invisible in middle income and rich countries, is the malaria burden, which is killing about 600,000 kids a year. Yeah. Where you are in Brazil, dengue's gone up somewhat. We do have new tools to reduce mosquito populations, one that's still in the lab called Gene Drive that the Gates Foundation funds, and should help us with all those mosquito-borne diseases. What we see is when you get a lot of flooding, which you get a bit more of with climate change, mosquitoes really thrive. And so places like Pakistan, where you have very little malaria, then when they had the flooding, now it's come back in a pretty big way. And so, that innovation pipeline is coming along. It should get even more money, but we will be able to get rid of those vector-borne diseases in countries that want to embrace these new tools.
I'll ask you one last question about Brazil. I mean, this is a place we've heard where, especially on the climate side, a very, very high proportion, probably higher than anywhere else, certainly above 90%, coming from renewable sources. Do you see Brazil as the center of this climate? It seems to be the center of both the pain in the Amazon, but also on the creative side. Is that something you've been following?
Well, certainly at the UN General Assembly, the Gates Foundation had our goalkeepers event, and I gave an award to President Lula for the work they've done in reducing malnutrition. We've been talking with Brazil a lot about COP30 that's coming up, and that'll be a very important milestone both for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Brazil has done some good pioneering things on mitigation. The deforestation, it's important that get under control both for Brazil itself and for the world. So there's a lot being learned there. As I said, one of our best breakthrough companies is building a steel plant with partners in Brazil. So yes, agriculture innovation with Embrapa, Brazil is very strong. So it's fantastic, that the issue is a very important issue, and it deals with kind of the equity things that Brazil's been a global leader on.
Just one last thing on that, particularly on Brazil. Are you now much more, it sounds like you're more optimistic about Brazil than maybe if you and I talked about it 20, 30 years ago. It's a more positive story?
Well, Brazil's got a lot of assets, and it's kind of a mixed story because they've had challenges with governance, and who knows? They're like the U.S. They have a party that's sort of against all climate things and for Amazon destruction, and you have a party who cares about that. So I'm not an expert on what the balance will end up being over time. The whole world has this problem that we do need to invest in, Amazon forest destruction. We're very good at measuring it now because of satellite systems, but the exact policies that will get us there, still somewhat challenging, particularly as you get different parties in power.
Bill, thank you very much for talking to us again. Covered many, many subjects. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you.